The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome everyone to today's Real Training for Free. Nick Cavalancia here sitting in for Randy Franklin Smith. You know, one of the most frustrating parts of responding to an incident in some ways really has absolutely nothing to do with the technical aspects of like the investigating, the detecting, the identifying, and remediating of the attack activity that has happened in your organization. In the circumstances and scenarios where the response really needs to be swift, but there are lots of ways that you could possibly be addressing an attack. That frustrating part often comes down to sort of an executive making decisions like, do we shut everything down or do we just investigate further? Like, what do they know? And despite really your best effort at trying to educate them on what you found and what you think is the best recommendation, they make I'm doing air quotes here, the wrong choice in your eyes anyways, right? So that's the wrong answer. And so the question kind of becomes, how can you best communicate with executives? And that's whether they're technical or not, really, to ensure that they both understand the ramifications of the decisions they're going to make, if you will, and then also make the right decision. And then today's training, that's what we're really going to focus on, is looking at incident response, trying to focus a lot more on communication, but we are going to do a lot around the incident response actions that should take place, do a little decision-making testing using LockBit as an example. So I'm very excited about today's webcast. This is a very cool topic. The Real Training for Free today has been sponsored, made possible by the folks at Immersive Labs. And I am joined today by both Kev Breen, he's the Director of Cyber Threat Research, and Chris Pace, Technical Advocate. Both these guys have been on webcasts with me before. Kev, Chris, thanks for joining me again.
Thanks for having us.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
That was pretty good. That's a good answer. You guys didn't like mash each other up. That's perfect. So a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. As always, today's Real Training for Free is being recorded, and you'll be sent a link in a day or two. So if you want to come back and listen to the recording, that sort of thing, you should have already received a copy of the slides, I believe, via email. If not, we'll make sure those get sent out afterwards. While we're doing the webcast, I do have the Q&A box open up here in front of me. If you have a question, comment, and joke, anecdote, story, something you thought you just care to share, stick that in the Q&A box. We're going to try and incorporate your thoughts, questions, and so on within the presentation and discussions that we have today. And if for some reason I miss it, or maybe just it came in a little bit after we've sort of moved on topically, we'll certainly have formal Q&A time at the very end as well. So with that, let's sort of jump in, and where I'm going to start. I think I clicked on Immersive Labs. That was weird. I clicked on the URL, didn't mean to. The place where I'm going to start is just kind of talking a little bit about why it is that IT and the C-suite talk different languages. And then Chris brought up something a little early on. We were first kind of formulating this topic and what we were all going to discuss a little bit, and use this sort of Chicken Little analogy. And we're going to kind of dive into that by talking about some different aspects of where you're very much focused on, this is the next thing, this is the correct answer, this is technically what needs to happen next, and avoiding being just Chicken Little where the sky is falling, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. Talk about that, and then putting incident response into business terms. And I've got a couple of resources for you to utilize to try and help with that as well. So the first thing here is just, why is it that all of you and the C-suite speak different languages? Now, if I was going to pose to you the idea of your organization has been hit with a cyber attack, and then I was to ask you, what are the things you immediately think of? You've been hit with ransomware, and it just happened 5 minutes ago. Go. What are you thinking about? And I put up some words here that I'm not going to beat a dead horse with, but these are the kinds of it's the things you've got to do next. Those are the things you're always thinking of. And I would be as well, because I'm trying to go, what is my next steps? That's where my focus is. That's where your focus is. And then you're thinking these kinds of terms, but then you're also thinking about the technical and practical, the down to the what is it I'm actually going to be performing, response steps that need to be done based on either the information you have at hand, or that I need to collect some more information, I don't have enough, that kind of thing. So that's kind of where we start. And Kev, I've already dubbed you in a prior conversation our honorary chief propeller head of this webcast. I made a joke offline about how many Raspberry Pi devices that Kev had, and I was making a guess. And Kev actually came up with like he had 21 of them or something. I'm like, see, I'm right. So Kev, I'm going to pick on you only because I love you and know you well, and I know you don't mind.
Feel
Why
free
do you
to pick
think
on me
that?
anytime.
Nah, stop it. So why do you think that we as IT professionals, as security professionals, we jump immediately to this and we're thinking about all the technical aspects? Is it just because that's what we love and that's the way we think, or is it something more?
I think it's a bit of all of those things. The thing for me is like the main reason I jump straight to the technical is because I need information. I need to know more. I can't make really well-informed decisions if I don't understand the tech. And for a ransomware attack, everything I want to know is in front of me somewhere. And some of it might be easy to get, some of it might be harder to get. And I think that's why we're drawn to that, like that super high technical side, because that's where the information is. And it's fun. Like it's always fun to chase the attacker through the technical stuff. So I think that's the kind of stuff that draws us in.
Chris, do you agree?
I suppose there's always the possibility that the nature of the way our industry has developed has meant that traditionally the idea of approaching a security incident in this way, focused on these things, would have been totally normal. But now, because these incidents and these incidents in some cases that turn into crises have become kind of so organization wide, so ubiquitous, like they're in the minds of the CEO. These things have started to matter a lot more. And so I think traditionally these things would have been the things that would matter. And so perhaps that's why that's still where we go. I guess the challenge is, can we broaden how these actions, these activities, practical response steps, all those kinds of things, how do they play into what the rest of the business requires in order to effectively deal with an incident or a crisis?
Yeah, I think both of you are a really good perspective. That's why I wanted to hear from both of you each, because I knew there'd be something slightly different from each of you. Kev, I tend to side more with you in my initial knee-jerk response, which is, okay, cool, we got attacked, kind of, right? And then it's like, now what do I go and I find out what's going on?
Trust
and
me,
I can
your
now,
C-suite, your C-suite, Nick, are never thinking that. Like,
I know but at the same time, I think all of our audience can at least understand that. And at the same time, so now if we go back to this and look at, what is the C-suite thinking about, and we look at this here, this actually comes from Kroll's State of the Incident Response report this year. You can see these different aspects. Start with like, what's the impact going to be on the organization, the reputation of the organization? I by the way, I reframed these slightly, but I didn't lose any of the meaning of the responses. What data is going to be compromised or has been compromised? Are we going to be disrupted a lot, or can we keep operating? Are we going to lose business, revenue, customers, that kind of thing? Is there a negative impact from a legal standpoint where we're responsible for something, or a regulatory impact? And if you look at this, these are material numbers. Half to almost 2/3 of organizations are represented here that are really worried about these issues. And Chris, I'm going to go back to you. These are all business issues. I think these sort of reflect where you were kind of going. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I would also say, of course, that if we think about ransomware, I'm my favorite way of describing ransomware at the moment is the shark closest to the CISO's boat. And I think that's why when you see these stats, if you then put that in the context of ransomware, it hits almost every one of these concerns. Reputation, because usually it's made public. Compromised data because you might be double extorted, disrupted operations because all your stuff's been encrypted. Again, reputation leads to the potential for loss of business, or lack of operation leads to the potential for loss of business. That's what makes, so when I look at all this stuff, the first thing I actually think is, this is why ransomware is just so pernicious and horrible. And
good word.
Whilst it may be exciting to a technical person, to a business is the kind of thing that does, I don't want to say literally keeps them up at night, but certainly is the thing that they care about a great deal.
Kev, do you ever think of any of these things? You representing the tech side of the conversation, if you will.
I try not to.
Fair answer.
In my early career, none of this even occurred to me. I'm fortunate that I've spent enough time in this industry now that I understand this impact, so it is more forefront in my mind. But no, definitely early in my career, it didn't even occur to me that about like any potential operations that might be disrupted or what the reputation might be. I was like singularly focused on my job here is to tell people what happened. So that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, and it's a necessary piece of the puzzle here. It's providing the C-suite the details they need. Much like you're saying, I need more information, and it's all in front of me. The C-suite obviously knows the same thing, but they have no ability to get it, but you do. And then you're helping them make hopefully some good decisions. Now, to kind of not exacerbate this more, but to kind of put this in perspective, I wanted to title this slide, as you can see on the left here, there's definitely a disconnect. I think there is one that exists here. The first thing starts with, this comes from VMware State of Incident Response, and you see here that it's not exactly half, but it's a little less than half of IT leadership. They don't really technically understand the initiatives. Even I think if you've got a C title that the next letter is an I or maybe a T, in some cases, they still may not have a full breadth of understanding than the folks that are the security practitioners on today's training, doing it in the trenches, are going to have. So I'm going to somewhat interpret this number on my own volition here to say, I don't think that means they have no clue what you're doing. I think this means more like they don't fully understand what the solutions can do, how that adds into a layered security strategy and defense in depth and things like that. If they have some inklings of what it is, they probably have to read up on it if they were going to go talk to the board, that kind of thing. But they definitely don't understand the initiatives to a degree.
And that's fascinating. Just to jump in there, Nick, that's fascinating. Because basically what we're saying is, we're saying the leadership who approve a budget to invest in these kinds of solutions, whatever they are, and would be expected to articulate the value of what they're doing to a board or a C-suite, for example, don't actually understand why the projects that they're running.
I would say don't understand completely. And also to represent all of the Kevs that are on this call today, right? The ones listening and the one that can speak. They're never going to understand at that level, right? They never understand the level of any of our people in the audience. So I that's why I'm kind of reading it. And there was no more detail in this particular stat. They didn't go into what does that mean. So I'm having to read into that, thinking back to even my own executive experience and that sort of thing in a prior life, and saying, all right, that can't mean like they're complete idiots. They have no idea what's going on. You're like, yeah, sure, just buy that blindly. Of course not. And I know you weren't implying that, Chris, but I'm just going to one end of the spectrum. It just shows that they are not going to understand technically as much as all the Kevs in the room would understand.
What I was driving more at is the idea is that because of the increased interest in what's happening in this part of a business from those at the top, there becomes a responsibility for those people in that CI, as you quite rightly said. They have a weighted responsibility to almost provide proof, don't they? They need to provide metrics and measures and what shows the impact of what they're doing on risk or the effectiveness of their security and all those kinds of things. And the potential lack of insight creates almost another disconnect there then between that CI person and the very top of the business.
I would completely agree. One of the challenges here that exists, and this is almost the same kind of percentage here, there's a lack of a defined communication process between the IT and security folks that are on the boots on the ground doing the work, and then their C-suite above them. And so this also shows probably partially why they don't understand the initiatives. And these two alone kind of spell a recipe for disaster. There's no formal communication process. The leadership doesn't entirely have they have an inkling of what's going on. They have some level of understanding, I'm assuming, but not the same level. And yet somehow in the midst of these two stats, all of you on today's webcast that are listening are expected to be able to go to your CIO, your CTO, and say, here's what's going on, and here's what I think we need to do. And obviously, it can be a little more than a meeting in their office or a phone call or an email. But what if it needs to involve, more than just the CIO, or if there's something that it's a decision that needs to go all the way to the board, or something along those lines? There's just this lack of process that's in there. And then just two other stats that come from IBM's Cost of a Data Breach report. Almost half of organizations believe that the CISO is responsible for the breach, but almost half of them believe that the CIO or CTO is ultimately the decision maker. Makes no sense. It does, but it doesn't. But it's just like, yeah, it's the person responsible is not the person making the decisions. So if you're going to your CIO for whatever reason, they're making the decisions, but they're not the one that's going to be held responsible by the board. I don't know. And this may not be the case for your organization, and that's okay. But it's just an interesting data point here that just shows how this isn't perfectly aligned, or at least isn't planned to be aligned, and it certainly can be. Kev, Chris, any commentary here?
Well, I think this is to do, and I've referred to this already. I think this is to do with the age of our industry, and all of our professions. Like, it's such a young. The CISO is such a young role in many organizations that's slightly odd. Do they have a seat at the board table is a conversation that's happened a lot, whilst at the same time they often report to a CIO who holds their budget. So the CISO has to go and justify their budget for all the initiatives that they have to a CIO who will decide what they should and shouldn't have. But then, of course, in the event of something going wrong, these stats would suggest that the CISO is the one who ultimately becomes responsible for the breach. I think it's a bit born out of the, I don't want to use the word immaturity, that seems unfair, but the sort of burgeoning nature of the CISO as a role.
So with that kind of responsibility, who would ever want to be a CISO? Like, if you look at,
can you just take that S off my title, please? Thank you.
It's just like, if that accountability, if that is where it stops, then that's going to affect people wanting to move up to those roles. If you come in knowing that you're like responsible, if there's a breach, without the proper accountability and understanding what happened and all that, then yeah, that could be a terrifying prospect, especially considering if you have a look at some of the things that have happened over recent months where organizations have been compromised due to third-party supply chain. There's no way a CISO could predict that that's going to happen, yet they're still held responsible, and their heads into the chopping block seems potentially unfair.
Good point there. So let's talk a little bit about how to put some kind of proper incident response communications in place. And I put a bit.ly link up here towards the top. It is case sensitive, at least the last half after the / is. And this is from CERT, which is Carnegie Mellon University. And those folks there have built this guide to effective incident management communications. And I grabbed it because it's the closest thing I could find that actually had some really good detail on how to build a good incident response plan. And they have sort of 10, I'm going to call them sort of 10 best practices, or 10 perspectives on what you should be doing here. And I grabbed 7 of them, and I slightly modified them to be just about the issue between the IT and security folks that are on today's call and the C-suite, and having conversations. So first off is thinking about communications as being strategic, something that we don't think about. You could hear even just Kev, when he was responding to my initial question about why do you think we just go right for the technical stuff, he's like, I got to know everything that's going on inside. I'm going to infer from that, Kev, nowhere in your mind is like, and I've got to be able to communicate this effectively to my boss. You're not. You're like, I just know what's going on. Correct?
Yep. Correct. Yeah. Absolutely correct.
And so that's the thing, is that even all of you on today's call, because we all want to go towards the technical stuff and try to figure out what's going on, look for the activity, dive through the logs, try to correlate the data, come up with some context, understand what's going on, those kinds of things, but have to be thinking about the communications part as being strategic. And there should be actually a plan in place for the communications, something where each of you that are listening today understand as part of your role that you're going to have to communicate to someone. It depends on the incident response plan. It's maybe not just the CIO or the CISO or the CTO. It might be a whole panel of people that are responsible on your incident response program that you have in place in terms of the team that's doing that work. And then I found this kind of interesting. This was originally written in the context of like the organization, but I liked it, and I wanted you to be thinking about this from the context of you. Just you as an individual. Consider your messaging. So like, how are you delivering it? What's the medium being used? What is it you're actually saying? Think about your reputation. And then the stakeholders, then in my mind, I'm thinking that's the people you're talking to. If it's the C, that's great. If it's an entire board, that's fine. If it's an IR team, that's fine too. but you're thinking about those as factors here when you're figuring out your communication plans, because it might be what you're realizing is, I mean, put it this way, I'm going to speak candidly for all of you in the audience. There are some of you that are like, okay, well, our security team, they need to know what to do. Our C-level, they're a complete idiot. And I'm just going to tell them what they need to hear. And we're going to go do what we need to do. You know, and some of you already are like nodding right now. I know you are. There's a couple of you at least. And so you might be in this, even this tone, you might be going, okay, well, then I got to figure out how do I create the right message for the C-suite so that they hear what they want to hear. And we look like we're rock stars, so reputation is upheld. At the same time, them as a stakeholder, and they're the one that's ultimately responsible, making sure they still look good or whatever the case is, as part of that plan. Now, obviously, you're not going to officially write into the plan, just tell the C-level whatever, because obviously not going to do that. But you think about this perspective. This is a lot more detail than, and you notice nothing in here says consider which technical details you're going to be communicating. That's not what this is about. This is about communicating what's going to happen and putting this in terms they understand. And in fact, I'm going to kind of go through this next one here. But it's in terms they understand and them understanding the ramifications of what's going to happen if they don't do something. And it's usually in business terms and not ever in technical terms. You might say, I can do A or B, and A or B are technical actions, but it's always in, if I do this, this is what the impact's going to be in the business. You tell me what you want to do, kind of a thing. But also and letting them educated on the risks. So when you're building your communications plan, the recommendations that CERT has here, and you look at this list here, the purpose of the communications, who it's going towards, the roles and responsibilities within the context of the incident response that particular audience or members of the audience are going to be playing. So you can think about the context of who's receiving this. Is your message too technical? Is it too business related? Does it not have enough specificity? Those kinds of things. That's why purpose, audience, roles, and responsibilities come into play. Standardized messaging would be important. Things like terms that you're using. Just if you're going to use the term threat actor, but I'm going to say cyber criminal. Well, wait, are we have two attackers? Are we getting under 2 attacks? We didn't use the same terms. Even those things matter. And then the communication channels and methods of distribution are always defined so that there isn't like an alternate message. Like the alt news kind of concept that came out years ago, and your own set of facts and those kinds of things. You want to avoid that. One communication channel, one method of distribution. Here's a distribution list. Everything goes in the distribution list. One set of terms, and then that whole thing. So that way it's a concise form of messaging, a concise message, and so on. This I found interesting. Continually train to and test the plan. So they're talking about the communications plan, testing the communications plan. So that's kind of an interesting one. I can say I've never done that, so I'm not sure how I would execute it, but I find that fascinating. And when I lean back on some of the business continuity work that I've done, and knowing that I've got to test those plans and real world simulations and things like that, it makes sense to at least test out the plan from a perspective of seeing if the communications work. Is everybody getting it? Are they responding to it? Does everyone understand the message being laid out? And for example, off the top of my head, you could do at least testing out the plan by writing up a scenario and sending the message out saying, here's the test scenario. We've been effectively attacked, pretend attacked anyways by some ransomware variant, blah, blah, blah. These are the machines that are affected, and go through the process and see that everyone understands it, doesn't have questions, during your simulation, so that way they can be answered and they're not being raised when you actually are having a real situation, because no one has time for that. And then this one here is also thinking about the mechanism of communication will depend on the scenario. If it's ransomware and they were really good at what they do and they wiped out everything, including your on-premises email, and it's all locked up, can't use email. So what are you using as a backup? And that's one of the reasons why you're thinking about your communications plan, things like communications channels and methods of distribution. Maybe you're switching to SMS text, or you're going to use an online copy of Teams or something, whatever it is. And then the last one here, and I changed one word in this one, the word leadership. This was originally written about like the media, I think, but it says the way you interact with leadership in a crisis will ultimately affect the level of trust your constituencies place in you, meaning going back to your reputation and number 3, the way that you interact with them, because I'm trying to set the company up for failure, trying to set you, Mr. or Mrs. CIO, up for failure, I'm up for success, excuse me, not failure, success. Wow, that was bad. I want to set the company up for success. Let me rewind. And I want to set you, Mr. or Mrs. C-level person, up for success. And I want to make sure that we're making the right decisions that are going to positively impact the organization. And you want them to understand that they can continue to have trust in you the next time, the next time, the next time. So a lot of talking on my part, but Chris, Kev, commentary on any of this?
I would only add that I think that terminology, and you referenced it, so I would echo it. Terminology is one of the biggest challenges, and again, it's becoming a recurring theme. But again, goes back to the kind of where we are as an industry. You know, terminology is not agreed upon, commonly used. There's a lot of marketing involved in language that's used around communicating things like threats and the nature of them, and I think that makes how you communicate really, really important, and in a way, like creating a glossary of terms to enable, particularly in the context of crisis, the C-suite, to enable them to be able to understand what is actually happening and what it means, is becoming increasingly important. And I think we haven't yet, as an industry, caught up with how to have set terms of reference, to use, standardized naming and all that kind of thing. I think we're headed towards that with things like MITRE. I think the explosion of MITRE's popularity in recent years is to do with the fact that it creates a standard lexicon, and that's why people like it. And I think we have to have more of that in order to enable those with boots on the ground at the front line to be able to do the things that are described in these steps.
It's like the InfoSec community specifically seems to be really bad at this, because like we've almost come to a who can name it the best, and like we see people that like who find a vulnerability, they'll name it and they'll release something, and then somebody else will take that same thing and name it something different, and then somebody else will take that exact same thing and name it something different. We see this a lot with like APT groups, where every threat intel provider has their own naming convention. So now it becomes really difficult for me from a technical perspective to try and make sure I'm looking at the right IOCs. Like, is this Print Nightmare? Is this Hive Nightmare? Like, is this APT 29? Is this like Wizard Spider? Like, there's enough confusion out there for us, like bringing it in, that we definitely don't want that to seep through back to the C-suite. Because if it's confusing for me technically, and I sit in it like every day, then by the time it gets up to the C-suite and they see Wizard Spiders appearing in their briefs, like they're not going to understand what's happening.
That had a double meaning.
Yeah,
Wizard Spiders appearing in their briefs. I could tell when you said it, you were like, "Oh, this might."
As I said it, I knew.
That's fantastic. It reminds me of the. Did you guys see the movie The Martian?
Yes.
Yes.
I forget the line because I'm not the big fan, but it was they named the project a secret meeting of something, and was it the Game of Thrones reference or Lord of the Rings reference or something? Do you remember that?
I can't remember
why is this
but I know
called
what you're
this?
on about.
Yeah, and then she's like, I hate you all, because she has no idea what they're talking about. It's exactly what she's talking about. We're talking about things we know really well, and I can't remember what the quote was. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but hopefully if you guys have seen the movie, there's a whole thing where there's got like Project Eldorn or something or other, and she's like, why is this project called this? And it was the PR woman, and she has no idea, and it really made more confusing than anything. Chris, I want to ask you real quick. We talked about that Chicken Little concept at the early on,
Yes.
and I'm looking at number 4. And number 4, that sub bullet, if you read through those words, it's very calm and planned and organized and proactive, and I mean it is, right? But we all know, of course, in the middle of the whole thing, it's like, oh my gosh, I found the attacker and they're still here, and they're we're doing the security practitioners on today's call, they're in the middle of it and are emotionally connected to this whole thing. And this is all great, even if we standardize like only one brief will be sent out per day to update all management. That may not work. And so can you talk a little about what we talked about early on about the Chicken Little kind of factor that comes into play, and how you think it might even kind of fit into this?
Well, so it's basically every conversation that I ever have with Kev. Oh, no, that's not true. They go down two roads. Either I have a conversation with Kev where I've seen something in an article that's been really well written, and has engaged me because it's well written and looks like a cool and novel threat thing. And so I say to Kev, "Hey, Kev, this cool and novel threat thing looks bad," which is the equivalent of the CEO stopped the CISO in the hallway and said, "Hey, that thing I was reading about this morning, we're covered for that, right? Like we're okay." It's kind of the equivalent of that. To which Kev replies, no, it's absolute rubbish. No hacker's ever gonna, use that for a real attack. It's nonsense. Then the thing that is on page 9 of the register that some new CVE that no one cares about in some piece of software I've never heard of, and I say to Kev, "Oh, that thing is nothing," but lots of people on Twitter are talking about it, and Kev says, "Oh, it's so bad." It's like really bad, and then starts talking about things like remote code execution, and I'm kind of lost. But what I do know at the end of it is that it's really, really bad. Now, if I think about being a CISO in that context, my experience is that things that get lots of headlines are grabby and take my attention, but things that don't get lots of headlines could be really bad, and I might have no clue about them. And I rely on people like Kevin, his equivalents, to be able to communicate to me what bad really means. Like, what's your measure of risk? What's the likelihood of impact? Now, Kev, obviously I'm caricaturing Kev. Kev is extremely good at articulating this
I think we
stuff,
all but
but
killed his self-esteem.
Oh no, that's not possible anymore. He's too big a deal now. But basically it's that whole challenge of when a new threat, vulnerability, exploit has that frisson of excitement about it. How do we ensure that we communicate the potential risk that it poses in a way that is both A, directly relevant to the business, B, in a language that the person who needs to make a decision can understand? And otherwise, if you don't do that, what you end up with is Chicken Little syndrome, which is always every new thing that comes about that could be being exploited by a threat actor becomes the next thing that's going to bring your network crashing down. I think that's one of the challenges that needs to be addressed in this whole area of communications to decision making.
Completely agree. Love that. And then the sky is falling. The sky is falling is obviously not a good communications plan.
It's worked for me.
One of our audience members, Ian, actually asked a question here. He says, what's your advice for businesses? And I'm assuming, Ian, by the way, that you're the business here in your scenario. He says, what's your advice for businesses that outsource IT to managed service providers and have no internal IT executives like a CIO? And or if Ian, if you're the MSP, then just jot that in the Q&A box just so I have some context here. And I'll kind of answer this because I used to own an MSP. If we're looking at this from the client business's perspective, and you've got an MSP that's providing, okay, Ian says the business's point of view. Okay. I'll kind of answer it both ways, but you'll kind of be able to figure out the other way as I go through this. I would expect that the business would say, look, okay, you're providing me security services, and no MSP in the world is ever going to give you like a remediation SLA that they're going to go out of business. But they would certainly have some kind of SLA in place for like response time and things like that. I would expect if there was no internal IT, at least there's up front, there's some asking of the MSP, what's your communication strategy with us? I don't want you just coming in and making changes and then I just deal with the ramifications. I want to be able to make the decisions with you. You're doing the technical part, but it's my business ultimately. And I think it's just a question of who in your organization is that MSP's first point of contact. And there's still this, it's almost, the same kind of stuff we're talking about on this slide here that you can see, but you're just asking that of the MSP to go, okay, do you have some of this in place? Something. Now, I've done a lot of work with MSPs, and I know that most MSPs that have a security service of some kind in place, their SLA is probably as defined as their plan goes, and their response plan. Some do more, and they're going towards becoming an MSSP anyways, a managed services security provider. But those that aren't, that are just plain old MSPs, used to be break fix folks, and now they're doing remote monitoring and management, and they're doing backup and recovery, maybe some DR, and now they're delving into the security space. I would tell you most of them probably don't have a defined response plan, particularly a communication plan. So just kind of regurgitating the same thing again, but I would say you'd be asking of them, I need some kind of communication plan to make sure you don't make decisions without me. You don't take action unless I know about it first, and that sort of thing. So hopefully that answers your question here. Chris, Kev, anything to add there?
I think the one thing I'd add is, like, even if you don't have like a CIO internally from the business side, just make sure you have somebody who everybody knows is like accountable or responsible. So a named person and a deputy, so that if something does happen, like, you have those internal lines of communication. So I need to talk to the MSP. Who do I talk to internally that can start that conversation? So as long as you know that, then the rest will kind of follow. So you don't need and depending on the size of the business, you don't need a C-suite like CIO there, but just having somebody named that everybody knows this is the point of contact, that goes a long way.
Yeah, Ian's actually mentioning maybe a third party. Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
Wouldn't you also think in the context of, where we are today, the challenges faced, in terms of making sure that IT works in 2021, that having security be a key element of any service that you use should kind of be fundamental. Like you should be asking the question, in the event of an incident, what's the documented incident response plan? And to Nick's point, what should I expect in terms of communication? What should I expect in terms of how far you will go to, remediate? What constitutes an incident? In my agreement with you, like, you would feel that all of those things would be on the table, and that they'd be really important in the context of a managed service provider in 2021. You would think they'd have to be.
One would think. I mean, even Ian mentioned maybe suggesting using an independent third-party CISO to help. And I would say that's actually not a bad idea. That certainly would denote that the organization that Ian, that you work for, or any other organization in that same boat, certainly takes cybersecurity seriously, and it wants to make sure that the business is well represented in the midst of an incident. So I do like that idea. I don't know what the cost would be, that kind of thing, but it certainly makes sense to me to have somebody who gets business and technology and can listen to the techie MSP folks and talking about what they think they need to do. And then they can ask the questions like, how will this impact the business? How is it going to impact operations? And have a sense of what's going on there, and can't have the proverbial wool pulled over their eyes, so to speak. And then Kim actually just mentioned here, can we mention that there's a specific point in the skill of communication? There are lots of different skills people have, like negotiating, influence, and so on. And that actually, I think, speaks to, and Kim, I'm going to put words kind of in your mouth, I apologize, but is something along the lines of, who should be delivering the communications? No offense, but maybe it shouldn't be Kev. Maybe it should be Chris. Maybe I'm just saying as a point, because Kev, you're going to go through like all the stuff, and you're going to talk about all the different data points and technical aspects or whatever. Maybe you should be communicating that to Chris, and then Chris needs to be the one to formulate the message, because Chris 100%. Whatever it is, and so it's worth considering. I mean, you can call me anytime you want, Kev, but just maybe that's.
I'm Chicken Little and Chris. That's what I'm doing, and then Chris is turning that into something more sensible.
Yes, I'm trying to figure what child's tale is Chris. What character is he? I don't know. He's not Chicken Little though. Jeffrey asks, should any special or unique consideration be made when working with CISA, so the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, part of Department of Homeland Security? And I feel like I'm missing some context, but Kev, it sounds like you already have an answer, so I'll let you go.
I really like what CISA are doing here, and we've seen recent announcements from Microsoft and Amazon and Apple saying how they're now partnering with the US government through CISA to be more proactive with cybersecurity. So they're releasing a lot more information, a lot more timely. Obviously, it's all free intel, which is good. The one thing I would say is that your organization and your infrastructure better than CISA know your organization and infrastructure. So, like, it's a data point, but it's not. It's very easy to go, oh my god, I've just seen this on the CISA website. We need to patch this immediately. Like, you might not even have that infrastructure in place. So, like, it's a useful data point. I definitely make use of it, but it shouldn't be this is the thing I prioritize above all else.
Good points. I like that. So the last thing I'm going to mention here is looking back up at the bit.ly URL for the Guide to Effective Incident Management Communications. CERT, or they work, very much closely with NIST. And inside that document, this is a screenshot from within the CERT document that I gave you the bit.ly link on the previous slide. And if you look at the left, if you've been to any of the webcasts I've done before, when we've done some stuff on the NIST cybersecurity framework, the left should look very familiar to you. It's got the different functions and categories and subcategories and so on. And then eventually there's informative references and so on. And you notice how they highlight out communications, both in respond and recover. And there are very specific functions that you need to take care of. So there's nothing new to draw here, but I just want to point out that as much as I know Randy and I both have been talking about NIST for many years and try to incorporate NIST, just like you've heard, like MITRE was mentioned today, I think by Chris, and we talk about MITRE a lot as well. These are really good reference points and frameworks that can be used either to, in the case of like MITRE, it's more about understanding threat actions, but in the case of NIST, it's organizing an actual plan of how are you going to build a framework of how you're going to protect your environment, and then if something does happen, what are you going to do about it, as the case would be. So just kind of keep in mind that if you already are a fan of NIST, or your organization's adopting NIST, this stuff kind of aligns and fits right in, and it's along the same lines. It's just really focusing on communications. So with that, because we're about, I think 11 minutes behind where I want us to be, but that's okay. I'm going to be passing things over to Kev and Chris, who've been talking with me for a while. Chris is going to walk you through kind of an interactive LockBit attack response simulation. Chris, is the audience going to participate in this one as well?
Yeah, as always.
Okay,
once Kev shares the screen, yeah.
Perfect. So then what will happen is he's going to walk through this scenario, and he's going to provide you with some details, and you guys can actually walk through the scenario yourself. And it's sort of a choose your own adventure, if you guys remember those books from your childhood, and kind of see where you end up. And hopefully it's not, your company has shut the doors and you've lost your job and no one will hire you. We'll see if that's the end of your particular adventure.
That's a great ending. I would sort of wish that was.
No, please don't use that. That's a horrible ending. And then Kev's going to actually demonstrate some response activity and kind of walk you through some stuff in the real world of what you might be looking at. So with that, Kev, I'm going to go ahead and pass you a presentation, right? So you can go ahead and share your screen out, and I'll let you know when I can see it. And I can see your screen now. Instant response with a LockBit simulation. And with that, guys, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the code at the top, and I've realized we picked a code that either has a 0 or an O. I think it's a 0. Is it, Kev?
It's a 0.
Okay, so in order to play along, you just need to go to that URL, play.immersivelabs.online, and then enter that code into the box, and that will enable you to play along with us. That code stays at the top the whole time, so you can join at any time during the exercise. As Nick says, we're going to talk through a kind of crisis simulation. In this particular exercise, Kev, if you go ahead and start the exercise, actually, then I can just talk about the overview. So we must imagine that we are part of incident response at a company called BreathGen. We're a multinational company that supplies industrial gases to lots of industries, including medical, chemical, and manufacturing. We're co-headquartered in London and Texas, and we operate in more than 85 countries. We provide medically prescribed home and hospital treatments for patients suffering from chronic illnesses. You see them, some examples of which listed there, but also, of course, in the context of the pandemic, COVID-19 patients as well. We are in the midst of a major multi-million-dollar bid to supply a large national health service with liquid oxygen as we see a rising third wave of the coronavirus. But for us, there's a different kind of outbreak looming. Okay, Kev, do you want to move on to the next? So this is where we begin. For us, it's mid-afternoon on a Friday. Alerts of various types of suspicious activity on our network have begun popping up in our incident queue. There is the potential that any one of these alerts could develop into something more serious. That is the only situational awareness that we have at this moment in time. Which will we choose to investigate first? So these are the three: either unusual traffic from a web app, NetFlow is indicating that the application used for processing orders for new customers is seeing some strange looking network activity. Numerous failing logons. Alerts from our SIM show that an RDP server is seeing an unusually large number of failed login attempts, or malware detected on the COO's laptop. Your EDR solution has alerted you to a Word document file containing malware, and it's triggering a generic detection. So the boats are open. I guess it's worth caveating at this point, as it's my job to facilitate the exercise, that you have a limited amount of situational awareness. You only have 3 available options. This is very much asking you to answer this instinctively. I wouldn't suggest that there's any way that you could know whether you would choose the right path. It's asking you to instinctively choose what you think is the most is the way to prioritize your investigation. And if anyone wants to share why they chose their particular answer, then they should feel free to. But I think it's clear that there's no real right answer. I mean, Kev, unless you read those 3, and bearing in mind you have some familiarity with the scenario, but if you were reading those 3 with fresh eyes, and perhaps we should ask Nick, where would your attention be drawn to?
Ooh, pick me.
Yes, go on. Yeah, go on then.
You there in the shirt. The option 2 seems like the logical one, because 1 and 3. I mean, 3 obviously it's a generic detection, but it's not necessarily the attack that we're aware of. And the strange-looking network activity could be, I mean, anything. Could be some kind of broken application that's doing an abnormal number of DNS queries or something. I mean, or whatever. But having prior knowledge, we know that RDP is fluctuates between number 1 and number 2 as the first attack vector for ransomware attacks and that kind of thing. So I would probably go with option 2.
Okay, we got 60 votes in. Kev?
I mean, it's always hard because, like I said, we're dealing with very limited information. So all of these things could be true, but every single one of these has a counter as well. So your unusual traffic could be like somebody running a SQL injection attack against your web app. Or it could, like Nick said, just be a bad DNS query. Like your RDP logins could be somebody trying to brute force, or it could be a new joiner who's not remembered his password. Like, and what's your threshold for unusually large? Like most EDRs and SIEMs have something like 5 failed logins followed by a successful login. Is that unusually large? Like, is 10? And then malware, like malware on a laptop. And again, that means that something's got all the way through. So 1 and 2 are at the perimeter, 3 is on the inside.
Okay, well, 66 people have voted. It's enough for us to get a good read on what the audience think. It'd be nice if they, it's good because it's pretty evenly split. So that's exactly what we would expect for something of a finger in the air question with a little bit of context from the 2 experts. So let's go with the middle option. Okay, turns out RDP logins were failing due to a broken synchronization with Active Directory. As I said, there weren't really any right answers, but investigation of the incidents in a systematic way, and I guess that's the whole point of having, all the kind of software that helps with doing that job. But situational awareness obviously becomes the most important thing to really decide how you might ultimately end up prioritizing. Okay, Kev, let's go to the next inject. I'm conscious that we have 11 minutes or so to make up. So back to the COO. They have downloaded 2 files in an email from a recipient they say they know. One of these files is not being detected as malicious, although it's blank when opened, while the other contains malware that is currently being blocked from executing by the EDR. We need to act as quickly as possible to reduce the window for any potential attacker to do more damage. And to further complicate the situation, the COO is pivotal to that bid for the multi-million-dollar government contract. So which action are we going to recommend at this moment in time to deal with this issue of the infected document? So are we going to clean it? We're going to rely on our EDR to clean up any detected malware. Are we going to forensically image and wipe We would have invaluable forensic evidence, but it will be hugely time consuming, and we have to consider that leaves the COO without his laptop in the context of that ongoing bid, which is worth big money to the company. Or option 3, do we wipe? We wipe the whole thing to be confident any malicious code has been removed, but obviously any local data that the COO had on that laptop would now also be gone as well. Nick, are there any clues that you get from the summary of the situation, and then where does that lead you in terms of your answer?
See, what I don't like is although it's blank when opened. It's I don't like that. You're like, you guys are sneaky.
We have been known to be sneaky in these scenarios before.
I know. I don't like that. So one is malicious, and one contains malware. It's going to be blocked by executing from the EDR, which means the EDR is taking care of it. So given that there's some pivotal stuff going on, but it's been blocked by the EDR, and the EDR is getting it done, I feel like there's no immediate threat. It's just, it was detected. We got an alert like we should get, and we went over because it's the COO, and the EDR went, and I got it. It's cool. Now I might be playing this down a little bit, but I don't think it's worth cleaning or wiping just yet because it seems to be under control.
So we'd rely on the EDR basically to do the.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Which is option number 4 or something, or yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to go all Chicken Little right now, but so these things came in at the same time, and the EDR was great, and it detected one thing. But what are the chances that an attacker sent just a completely blank document? So I would still be concerned about what's in that second file, and the fact that we know it's blank. Does that mean the COO's opened it? So he's opened a document that came alongside a malicious document. So the EDR has stopped him from opening. The EDR stopped the COO from opening one, but allowed them to open a second, which came in at the same time. I'm concerned enough that I want some forensics. And for me, I want full forensics. I need to know everything that happened. I could be argued or bullied down into just getting copies of the files, but for me, I want to know everything that happened on the box. That's RAM, that's full disk, that's logs, that's everything. The sky's not quite falling yet, but it might be.
I mean, it kind of goes to the point. I mean, here, look, we're being asked to make a recommendation to the CEO, to the CISO. The risk is that your option 2 has a whiff of Chicken Little about it, because I'm immediately thinking, well, invaluable forensic evidence of what? We don't know anything. We don't know that anything's happened. We have a bid worth hundreds of millions of dollars on the boil here. The COO is obviously central to that. Removing his ability, I mean, in the short term, perhaps not just to work. You could obviously loan him a laptop. That's less of a challenge. But he would have to be set up on it. That would all take time. What about any local data that he might have on it that he may not realize, because perhaps he hasn't got a complete handle on where he's saved stuff? There's a for the C-level, for the CISO looking to make a decision, there's definitely more at play. I think your recommendation is, in a security context, is the right recommendation, but this kind of goes directly to that whole balancing probability, risk, and security, and in this case a situational awareness potentially later on down the line. Let's reveal the responses then. So we've got 78 voting. Oh, it's really close. So 44% are going with the option to rely on the EDR to clean it up. So let's go with that. Again, we referred to situational awareness already. I forgot to mention, of course, because I assume that people on these webinars have done these already, but we may have new people who haven't done the scenarios before. But on the right-hand side, you'll notice that there are various impact indicators, and they are designed to kind of move around in the context of the decisions that we make. So we might make decisions that boost confidence but end up using resource. We might make decisions that impact directly on the probability of us winning the bid. So those are things to just keep an eye on as we move through the scenario. Okay, Kev, next inject.
Do you want to have a look at our document first?
Oh yeah. Let's put Nick out of his misery, see what's going on with this document.
Yeah, so what we've got here is a simulated like analyst environment. So from that forensics we collected, like I said, whether it was through full disk, whether it was using the EDR, we've managed to pull that document back. And what we're looking at here is one of those documents. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to show you very quickly how you can get some really rich intelligence from these documents. And it's fair to say that EDRs aren't infallible, and that the attackers will use a wide variety of tools and techniques to evade the EDRs. And we quite often see multiple payloads sent. As they learn, they figure out what's blocked, what's detected, what isn't blocked, what isn't detected. So they iterate over things. So yeah, I would always be suspicious over everything arrives, especially if like 1 out of 3 is detected. The likelihood is high the others are as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to run some free tools. So OLE tools and OLE VBA, open source tools designed to analyze documents and tell us whether they're malicious or not. And as we can see here, this document is showing some clear hallmarks of being suspicious. So we've got 5 suspicious elements in here, all of which look pretty bad. So if we jump up to this, so this looks like it's a macro embedded in the document. Appreciate there is now some social engineering involved, especially in more modern versions of Office. You have to click a yellow banner, but we see the attackers using lots of social engineering either in the document or in the email or whatever delivery mechanism it was to try and trick people into opening it. Like this document is protected, click enable in order to see it, kind of thing. And if your users aren't aware of these techniques, then it's all too easy for them to open it up. So as we look at this, there's a few things we can pull out really easily. Virtual alloc exec, write process memory, create stuff, alloc stuff, run stuff. So the attacker's not really made much effort in hiding what's going on here. So create a process. We're going to get a thread into that process. We're going to change some of the memory to make it writable. We're going to write our own, presumably malware or shellcode into that process, and then we're going to execute it. That's all stuff I can tell very quickly just from these keywords that get highlighted by this tool. Looking down, I can see a long list of numbers, and then I can see this checks if we're on 64-bit Windows or if we're on 32-bit Windows. This is the file, so we can see down here. So it's going to run stuff, and it's going to take in that sproc. So it's going to start run dll32.exe. Then it's going to do that allocation, and then it's going to write our shellcode. So within a couple of minutes, I know exactly what's happening here. So let's grab all of that. So I'm just going to what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new array. I'm going to put all of this into there and just clean that up a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write myself a very quick Python script that's going to take this, it's going to decode it, and it's going to hopefully give me some more information. Some people may recognize this. As you start seeing more and more macro docs, you recognize what tools create what fingerprints. And if you're using something like Yara, then this will pick this up very quickly as well. This is Cobalt Strike. So this is a weaponized Cobalt Strike document. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cheat for time. Copy that. Paste that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new empty file. I'm going to take all of that that numerical data. I'm going to turn it into a byte array, and I'm going to write that byte array out. So like a few lines of Python, and then we should hopefully have something. So Python 3 test.py input array. Typing and talking is hard. So then if I run strings on that shellcode, so within a couple of minutes there, like I've opened that file, I've pulled some information out, and I've decoded it. So there's a few things that jump out to me as being obvious. That one there's a user agent string. That one there looks like an IP address, and that one looks like it's a really short URL path. And these well-known indicators, again, of a Cobalt Strike beacon staged payload. If you look at any ransomware attack that's happened within the last year or two, Cobalt Strike appears right at the top of the list. So very quickly being able to recognize this as Cobalt Strike, getting this IP address, this log data, means that I can be very confident what it is. And we know from the COO's response, they double-clicked this document. So now I know that Cobalt Strike has executed, but I've got an IP address, I've got a user agent string, I've got some signatural stuff, I can go and hunt for it.
So
back to you, Chris.
That's the initial analysis of the document, but it seems we're also we've seen a few other detections across different documents also caught across the business. Logs and SIM alerts appear to be showing us that the print nightmare vulnerability has been exploited, and it looks as though a new account has been created to allow the attacker to elevate their network privileges. Do you want to now take a closer look at the kind of the network element of this?
Do you want to take a look at the logs, or?
Yeah, let's do that.
Cool.
Then we can make our decision, can't we?
Yeah. So what we've got here is, again, so we did the document analysis. We've identified the COO's laptop. We know who the COO is. We've got that IP address. We've got the name of the document. So that gives us a really good starting point. And if we'd have gone for the wipe option, that nuclear option, we wouldn't have any of these indicators right now. We would have lost them. So like having some forensics in place means we can jumpstart this. So all we've got here is an Elasticsearch index. We're shipping in Sysmon logs. We're shipping in Windows event logs and PowerShell logs, like a standard set of logs you'd expect to see any good SOC get access to. And again, so we appreciate I'm going to be showing some fairly bad technique with not properly constructed queries. But so we know the name of that document was called Competitive Intel. So if I just grab that, come across here, I'll do. So if we have a look for that,
yeah, when you're finished with what you're showing, pause for a second. I got a couple of questions. Rewind a little bit and see if we can get them answered, but keep going.
So I can search that document. I couldn't spell it properly. So I can see here that I can see this document being opened. So now I know the time this document was opened. Like I can confirm it's the COO. If I expand these logs out, I can see if anybody else received this document, and I can see from there. So I'll just pause there while we go to questions.
All right, so this came in right around 1, but Jeffrey's asking what was the very first tool you used? I think that might have been the OLE VBA you used.
Yeah,
right?
So OLE VBA, which is part of the OLE tool set, Python tool set. It's available for free, so you can just pip install OLE tools, and then just give it the name of the document, and it will give you the breakdown of it.
And Onkar's asking, how did you know to look in the array data and not something else?
So this is everything. So if I go right up to the top, so this is that entire macro script. So the first bit is just setting up some variables and some data types. This section, more variables, more data types. This bit we can see is those API calls being set up. So we went through those. We see like an auto open, so run when we open. And then the only other block of data we've got is this myArray. Once we get to the end of that, we're just in that declaring the name of the executable file and then run it. But more like, even if this was bigger, when we're looking at obfuscated documents, large sets of numbers or large encoded strings like base64 strings, large sequences of hex, they are almost always obfuscated or encoded malware disguised to basically stop EDR string detection. So in there, we saw that user agent, we saw that IP address. By encoding it in this specific format, your EDR signature for that 3.IP address is no longer going to fire. So we almost always look for these big sequences of numbers. And in this instance, there isn't anything else, which is why our attention was drawn straight there.
And Onkar, I think they're asking a little later on, you did a for loop. He says, what did that for loop do again?
Yeah, so what that for loop does is take every individual integer in this array. We AND it with 0xFF, so we're turning it from an integer into a byte. We then write that out to a file which is shellcode.bin. There's more complex things you could do here, but that's just a very quick and dirty way of taking unsigned shellcode int arrays and turning them into bytes that can be written to a file.
And that's all the questions I think I have right now.
Cool. So coming back to our document then, just aware of time. So we take this, we can see Microsoft Edge was our first thing that happened. From the document analysis, we also know that rundll32.exe was used. So if we take a look at that, we can see lots of usage here, but some of this might be legitimate, some of it might not be. So now we can correlate this with the IP address. So I can see that that IP address has a process called rundll32.exe talking back to it. So like something is definitely happening here. So now I can pivot from here and I can start to have a look at other bits of information. Is this process calling other executable files? Just to short circuit. So Cobalt Strike uses PowerShell a lot. And if you're shipping PowerShell logs, then there's some interesting things we can look for. So looking for PowerShell NOP, exec, bypass encoded commands. These are all keywords that, again, like signify that something is happening. So if I expand this one out, then come down to the command line that was run. So I can see PowerShell was run with this base64 encoded command here, which like also looks somewhat suspicious. So if I take that, I head over to CyberChef, which is a brilliant tool released by GCHQ. I'm just going to put that base64 encoded text in there. So take that away. Oh. From base64. So from that, I can see that the attacker, through rundll, through that stager, ran this PowerShell function, which says download string from a local address, invoke nightmare, calling for a DLL that's sat in the user's directory called vlib.dll. So I can go back to my logs. I can start looking for vlib.dll.
The fact that it had the words invoke nightmare was the most Mr. Robot thing ever
I mean,
that we've done on one of these.
So I can see vlib.dll. I can see it appearing in the spool drivers directory. Tied with the name invoke nightmare. This is print nightmare. It's a well-known vulnerability that can be used to gain local privilege escalation, and it can also be used remotely. So if we go through more of these logs, what we determine is that the attacker used this locally to get local privilege escalation. That gave them admin rights. They used those admin rights to run Mimikatz. They used Mimikatz to dump credentials. They then used that to run this same exploit against the domain controller, gaining getting a domain admin account on the domain controller, creating their own account to give them some level of persistence, and then exfiltrating all of the domain credentials or the hashes from the domain controller, doing some other bits and pieces. But that's the core of what we determine. Again, like within minutes, we've got significantly more understanding of what's happened. And this is all because Nick thought he could just let the EDR clean up that file.
That's very good. And for clarity,
that was bad. Okay. Dear diary, never have immersive labs on again.
For clarity, all those phases that you referenced there, you could stand by all of, like you referenced exfiltration of the Active Directory data. You can kind of see the footprints or the breadcrumbs of that in this analysis, right? So it's not just we suspect, or there is a high risk of, or there's the evidence that shows this thing happened, right?
Yeah, so the evidence shows that those commands were run. The attacker's active. The evidence shows that the attacker staged something onto our device, so we know that there's data there. We've got if we did the full forensics, we can go and we can actually pull that back and like go 100%. But at this point, like we're talking like 80 to 90% like confidence that all these things have happened.
Percentages is a really good way of communicating, those sort of the brevity of some of these the gravity of some of these things, isn't it? And so you've kind of done it there. So what action are we going to recommend? These are our 4 options. We can either increase monitoring of that suspicious account. It could allow us to track what they're attempting to do. We should reset all passwords across the entire network. That would ensure other accounts the attacker might have access to are no longer accessible. Should we delete that newly created suspicious account? Removing this account might stop the attacker in their tracks. Or should we shut down the network? Devices will continue to be accessible locally, but without network services for either the attacker or users. Nick, this is a big recommendation. What are you thinking based on Kev's analysis?
I don't know, man. Maybe I don't want to go. Kev's just gonna make fun of me. So.
Oh no, it's okay. It's a safe space here. This is a safe space.
I'm taking a practical. So I'm aware of Print Nightmare. It's gonna obviously get local system accounts on local system access, on whatever infected machines they gain access to. I'm also going to assume that because if one system is vulnerable to Print Nightmare, that probably means they all are. And along those lines, if we've only detected, I'm going to infer from the options, we've only detected one suspicious account. I think option 2 seems a bit much, as does option 4. I don't think that I want to monitor the suspicious account, but at the same time, there's this part of me that says, I don't know, do we know, are we certain they didn't create any other accounts? Because if we delete the first one, then they go to the second one that we're unaware of? Or...
Remember, Kev was really clear about that. They exfiltrated all of the Active Directory data.
Oh,
I mean, they created a new suspicious account, but that's only potentially the first thing, right? So,
yeah, so
I don't like
the attacker ran DC Sync. The attacker ran DC Sync. So they have all of the hashes. Their hashes.
Then option 2. I hate you, Kev.
I mean, we saved you. We gave you context.
We'll let people
the
carry
file
on.
was empty. Come on, you saw it yourself.
I think what's interesting about this is actually it's the situational awareness, not the available options. And I'm going to a bit of anecdote now from an event that we ran yesterday with a load of CISOs. They were extremely reticent to choose option 2 or option 4 because of its impact on business operations. They were, but statistically, we know, because we've run exercises like this with them and with you before, that when the option to shut down the network is given in the context of a ransomware attack, they are much, much more prepared to make it. So why is that? Why is it that you would shut down the network based on a ransomware attack? Because your network's already crippled, and what difference does it make? So that's an easy decision to make in the context of an attack. A much harder decision to make in the context of an attack is my extremely capable and effective incident responders tell me there's a 90% probability that I have an attacker active in my network helping themselves to my data, but I'm not prepared to make a decision that requires, that requires me to take action that might interrupt business operations. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So that's these are the options that we have. I sense that this is a tough decision because we haven't got as many responses as we did for the previous answer. So I know I understand that it's difficult, and it's that balance, of course, isn't it, between removing, keeping the business running based on the available intel you have against, potentially adding more risk. So let's reveal the responses at this point. It does look like the majority have gone for resetting all the passwords. It feels like definitely feels like the least worst of the kind of take action options. Kev, are there any, to your mind, would there be any reasons why you would choose option 4 over option 2? Does option 2 leave any windows open?
Yeah, it leaves all of the windows open because, great, reset all your passwords. Have you patched Print Nightmare yet? No. So the attacker can just run it again. So yeah. It's a great step, but when you take a step back and think about it in context, like what I should do is I should patch Print Nightmare on the domain controller and then reset all passwords across the entire network. Because if I don't, the attacker can just come and do it again. So unless I'm confident that I have completely evicted them from the network at this point, maybe shutting down some of the network, at least maybe the external part of the network, so the attacker, so like disconnect us from the internet, like don't let anything in, don't let anything out, that kind of shutdown rather than like turning off like all the devices is probably an appropriate response, especially if we're concerned.
Okay, good. Let's crash on because we're as usual rapidly running out of time. Okay, next. So the CISOs push back to us, even though they have the latest situation awareness, you've given them everything you have, and they understand the potential seriousness, they will take a lot of convincing to recommend this kind of drastic action. Their main concern is the potential impact this could have while the company is in the process of tendering for that bid. We can now choose how and if we will attempt to take time and resources to persuade the CISO that this is the right course of action, even with the potential risk to business operations and the continuation of the bid. So these are the 4 options. Do we craft a response based on threat intel, so the latest available intelligence on how threat actors are using the Print Nightmare vulnerability and what that might mean for us? Do we go risk focused? We work with the company's cyber risk assessment to quantify the impact of not taking action. Do we simply not attempt to convince them? They obviously understand all of the available options and it's down to them to make a decision. Or do we emphasize the urgency, arrange a face-to-face to restate the reasons that we've made that particular recommendation? Nick, you must have views on how this communication challenge needs to be addressed.
First off, I'm just going to say for the record, I like the face-to-face nature of option 4. That's not my choice, but I've always raised my kid. I have 4 kids, and 3 of them are old enough to either be working or in actual out on their own. And I've always told them some things are a text, some things are an email, some things are a phone call, and some things are in person. And you have to know the difference. That's really important. So I like the face-to-face because that's a face-to-face. I think the answer is option 2 because you've got to go, I get the bid, but if we don't do something, we're going to be on the cover of, some magazine that we were the next one hit and no one's going to do business with us anyways. And so, but I'm also thinking very much in a business kind of centric mindset rather than a tech mindset, but I think the option 2 makes the most sense.
Kev, what's your pleading?
I mean, I always try and avoid 4, just because when I try and explain things, like if I'm trying to phrase this in the politest way I can, I've come up against some difficult execs and trying to explain to them the importance of the thing and just having them go, yeah, but can be incredibly frustrating. Option 1's where I go to technically, like I can demonstrate to you through actions that have affected other organizations that this exploit is preceded by Cobalt Strike and followed by ransomware. And if we look at where we are now, we've got Print Nightmare, we were preceded by Cobalt Strike. Let me predict what's about to happen. But this brings us back to, I'm on the tech team, so I care less in my bubble about like the impact of what's happening with the bid. I care more about what's happening right now with the sanctity of my network.
That's the sanctity of your network. I love it. I am okay. So am I the only person then who just feels like, hey, you're a C-level guy or gal, person. You're getting paid the big bucks. I'm not getting paid the big bucks. I'm just down here, with my arms deep in malware and stuff. It's down to you. Option 3, like it's your decision to make. We've given you all of the intelligence. Why am I having to convince you? I mean, if you've done the job of providing the intel once already, why are you needing to craft a report? And isn't that just all adding more time? And isn't option 3? I mean, option 3 doesn't feel like the incident response plan option as described by Nick in all his previous slides, but in the context of a crisis, feels more real and likely.
Because it always rolls downhill.
Yes.
You will just turn around and go, why didn't you convince me that this was the right thing to do? So they don't have that against me. Nick can't use that against me.
No, that's a good one. In fact, I think we should coin the phrase, sanctity of network. We should make that an official.
Yes, Kevin will now get a T-shirt with that on. The sanctity of my network. Yeah. Okay, let's
network. That's all. So it's the highest sanctity of network score is in option 2. So.
Right. Let's see the responses because we're always time. Choosing the risk-focused approach.
No one likes you, Chris.
No.
No one picked option 3.
That's fine. Okay. There's no surprise we finally landed here. Screens are showing that messages announcing our important files have been stolen and encrypted. Our IT team does have reasonable confidence in our backups because they're off-site and not connected to the network, but they might take an amount of time to restore. Paying the ransom might be the fastest way to return to normal operations. This obviously isn't our decision to make, but the CISO is looking for our advice to form a recommendation that they would give to the board. This is the fastest option to get responses, and all of these people are clicking advise forming an IT task force to restore from backups. I absolutely guarantee. We don't have time to delve into the business ramifications of potentially not paying ransoms when you're in the throes of hundreds of millions of dollars of bidding for a contract. But Kev, let's have a quick closer look at this this ransomware. Or it must be bad because the desktop's red.
So the desktop's red. So again, analyst environment, and this is all part of the Immersives platform. So we spin up a Windows machine, and this one's not connected to the real internet or any kind of real network. So we can deploy ransomware at will. And all we've done here is where we've got those logs. If we go a bit further down the timeline of those logs, we can see that encrypted.exe was transferred onto the host. So we did full forensics, or if we did, we can grab a copy of this. And all I've done is I've started that. And as you can see, it's running, but nothing's really happening at the minute. It's all happening nicely and quietly in the background. And that's how ransomware is designed to operate. Ransomware isn't delivered as the first payload anymore. So it's not disguised. What usually happens is the ransomware is triggered by the attackers. And what this is going to do, and it might take us a couple of minutes, so we might have to skip over it, is all I'm looking for is who is the ransomware operator. So this is running, and I just care about getting that ransomware note. Because
why is that so important in the context of available situational awareness? We know that we've been locked out of machines, and we know that we're going to be asked for a ransom. We know all of that. So why is it important to look more closely at the actual type of ransomware itself? What are the reasons for that?
Because there are many different types of ransomware. Some of them are great, probably not the right word to use. Some of them are well designed and do a really good job of encrypting my files. And the only way to recover them is by getting hold of that decryption key. Some of them are not so good, and there may be weak encryption. You might be able to brute force the keys. There might be a publicly available free decryptor. Do we know if this specific group does double extortion, where they're going to hold my data to ransom as well? All of that information is given to me inside this lock screen here. And as we can see, LockBit 2.0, I can now go and do some OSINT, and I can figure out who they are and how good they are. Here's a link to go and see how much I need to pay. And here's a thing saying they've stolen data. And here's a link to the place where it's currently listed and how long I've got left to pay before they leak it online. And they tell me that if I attempt to restore this with some third-party software, it will be fatal for my files. So that
already feels pretty fatal. Already feels pretty fatal from my end. Okay, let's get back to the scenario, because we're up against it now. We're not too far away. I think we're a couple of injects from the end. So let's have a look and see. Overwhelmingly, people said don't pay the ransom. Great. Okay, we know that it's a critical decision. Right, so there's been a delay in the restoration. This is causing delays to the contract bidding effort because there's a lack of access to shared folders, and that is adding, that is creating a situation where we put into jeopardy our chances of winning that bid. So do we take the further delay? Otherwise, we risk potentially throwing away the good work that's been done so far. Or do we pay the ransom because further delay is incurring more cost at this point? It's also incurring more risk to that bid. So actually, whether we part with the money in the context of the ransom, or whether we lose that money in the context of the bid, is starting to become an ongoing conversation. Let's just let people.
Do you think this is going to be enough to convince people to pay?
No, it's not enough. The bid. My suggestion would be that the bid, like the status of the bid, probably won't be enough to make people change their minds, because I think mostly the reason
it will for the C level, but not for the IT practitioner.
Exactly, and I think most
how many millions are we losing already? How much do they want the ransom? Oh, they want this much. Just pay them. Let's just get on with it.
And I suppose in your mind, Nick, if you're in this situation, I'm guessing you're choosing option 2. Are you choosing option 2 for moral and ethical reasons, or do you choose option 2 because you think practically it's the best thing to do? We hear a lot of excuses around not paying ransoms because you don't know that they'll decrypt it anyway. They could just be lying to you.
No, the data's there. It's anywhere from like 85 to 92% of your data gets recovered for the most part. These guys they have a business interest in making sure you get your data back, because they want the next person to pay the ransom to get their data back.
Exactly.
But I'm thinking I'm putting more like on my ex-VP hat on, and I'm just going through this thinking if I was in the scenario. So it's not the right audience, but again, how many millions of dollars are we already losing? Because everything's not up again. We're losing in operations. If we don't get this bid, the thing's due next week, or it's due tomorrow, or we have to set up a meeting and no one can get the PowerPoint file that was created last month, or all those things come into play, and they're going, the $150 million contract is worth a lot more than that $10 million they want us to pay. So screw it. Just pay the ransom. Let's move on.
Okay. Let's have a look at the responses. Oh,
yeah.
There was a bit of the needle moved. Okay. All right. Let's go with no still. Okay. So do you see a pattern emerging in the scenario? The IT task force has been able to prioritize restoring the data, but there is a 4-day gap between the last known good backup and the most recent work of the bid team. The delay is compounding those that have already hit the project. The COO has now gone as far as to say that this puts a bid worth hundreds of millions at significant risk. The only way to recover the data is decrypt it. Your CISO and CIO are now asking again, is now the moment to pay? So you can see what we're doing. We're ramping up the impact that this is having across the business, and now we've got C-level communication effectively back to you. So the question is, the C-level didn't listen to your definition of significant risk. Are you going to listen to the C-level's definition of significant risk, and how much is it going to factor into the decision that you would make? So let's try and get to I don't know how many people we got to answer the last question, but let's try to
60,
get to at least 60. Let's try to get to at least 60, and then we'll.
Yeah, so just to explain what's happening here. So you have this thing called the recovery point objective. So we were doing great offsite backups, but those offsite backups are shipped every Friday. And what happened is it's Thursday today, which means we were encrypted today, which means Monday, Tuesday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, all that data is gone. It doesn't exist in your backups, but it does exist locally on these machines as encrypted data. So that is recoverable, but only if we pay.
Okay, let's have a look at whether that's moved the needle anymore.
There we go.
I think that is the first time that has ever happened on one of these webinars. Okay, let's select option 1 and let's get towards the end. So yeah, we took the difficult decision to pay. We have the decryptor, and now this is a sort of more of an operational challenge now. The SOC team not happy, or the security team not happy with running just some random binary from a hacking group across the entire estate. Company leadership demanding that we get back up and running as soon as possible. IT has reported that they can quickly package something and schedule it to run. What would our recommendation be for how we address all of these challenges and basically get this decryptor out as quickly but also as securely and effectively as possible? So that is option 1, deploy the decryptor immediately. So we'll restore all services as soon as we can. Every minute of delay is hurting us. The quicker everything gets up and running, the better. Copy all the encrypted files to a bespoke decryption machine. So this is the sheep dip approach. We can use that to be able to then copy files back to the normal systems. Do we work with a third party to create a trusted decryption tool? I understand that option 1, feels a bit nuclear, feels a bit kind of trigger happy. Option 2, Kev, doesn't seem too bad to me. It seems like it sort of circumvents the challenge. What might be the drawbacks with option 2?
Time. It's all down to time. There's a significant volume of data. You're going to have to copy it over. You're gonna have to decrypt it, then copy it back. Can you be sure that you copy everything? Can you be sure that decryptor really works? Like, there's some testing you're gonna have to do there, and it's a big time sink. If you've got 10 gigs worth of data encrypted, can you imagine trying to copy 10 gigs of data over a network to a device to then have to copy it back? Doable, but time.
We would also assume that the third party that we would choose to trust with creating the decryption tool would be familiar with having done this before with LockBit, and so they become kind of more of a known quantity, but of course would incur, there'd be a resource impact. They'd incur a cost.
Yeah, and some of them are really good. So they will take a copy of your encrypted data, try to decrypt it in place. And if it fails, like, it rolls back, like it will give you a log file that says we were unable to decrypt this one. Here's a copy of it still in place. Whereas the decryptor from the attackers doesn't have the same, like Nick said, it's 85% most of the time. So they care less about that. Make sure it works, but it's like typically not multi-threaded, like run single-threaded. So yeah, these third-party ones are usually very, very good at handling those edge cases.
Okay,
Frank
let's have a look
brings
at
up some real world context. So you can keep going, but the real world context of he was talking about actually in the last one, but he's saying you should negotiate because you're down to a couple machines. They said there's some work on this bid. Well, you could, in the case of this slide here, you could certainly copy the files for the ones that are part of the bid. And then, and just do those, but then deploy it to everything else, ASAP or whatever the case is, or vice versa. And so depending on how they look at it. So could take kind of a hybrid approach.
You can definitely try to negotiate, but the thing I'd say is the attackers, like that decryption key, they can't target it to a specific file. So you would still be able to use that, and they know you'll still be able to use that. So you could say, I promise I'll only decrypt these 2 files. But in reality, the attackers...
No, it's more about the value. You could negotiate with his point. I think you could say, hey, it's not worth it to us. We can just restore. Take us 4 days. We're fine. Or you give me the decryptor and I'll pay you $1 million instead of $6 million because I do have some stuff I want to get now. Yes or no?
To be fair, there are there are companies out there that will negotiate on your behalf as well, who will have some some kind of relationship with some of these groups. They'll have done business with them before, so they'll know how to get you the best price. I'm not making it sound very good.
Okay, let's select that option because I think we're done. I just wanted to yeah, there we are, finally. One day we'll finish one of these on time. We were close. Just two things to say at the end. The first thing is that there obviously is as I referenced, a CISO version of this scenario, as well as this one. We're going to very soon, and we will let you all know, going to release free versions of this that you'll be able to play yourself through the browser with access to the Immersive Labs platform. So watch this space for that. Of course, because these are choose your own adventure, if you choose different options, you'll experience a different pathway through the storyline. So it isn't always the same every time. So there's a good reason to go, and of course it's a fun thing to spend 20 minutes or so doing. So watch this space for that. And I'm sorry we're over again, Nick. We're over every time we do one of these.
And those practical labs will be released as part of that set as well.
At the same time, yeah.
Most of the folks have actually stayed on with us. I think they're enjoying this quite a bit. Interestingly enough, I think we've actually gone through all the questions. Everything I have left is sort of commentary about things throughout the presentation of the scenario. So I think we're actually good. So I'm going to go ahead and close us out, even though we're 5 minutes late. I really appreciate all you in the audience staying on and just hanging out with us. Today's was I think a real enjoyable and very educational kind of topic. We certainly enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. So thanks again to the folks at Immersive Labs for sponsoring today's Real Training for Free. Chris, Kev, thanks for the commentary and your conversation with me. I really appreciate it. I love when you guys are here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, glad you guys came. And that's going to conclude today's Real Training for Free. So thanks a lot for attending, and we'll catch you on the next one. Have a great day.